Are you gay for watching a partially naked, fat, and bald man tell you his story to fight footage about how he got in a fight with a guy who had knives in his shoes, sticking out of his shoes like claws and talons, because he thought he was a fox trapped in a human body? Of course, this was in a mental institution. And he tried to kick me with it because he was angry at me. Is this something that makes you a homosexual? To listen to the story from me? Well, I don't know if you're gay. I don't care if you're gay. But the world wants you to be gay. They need you to be gay. And that's part of the problem. That woke bullshit, that's what led to this being allowed to occur. Why this foxkin, as this guy put it, believing he was a fox in a human body, kind of like a furry that's been taken too far, was allowed to have knives sticking out of his fucking shoes in a mental health institution where you're not even allowed to have a pencil because it's considered a stabbing liability. Wasn't allowed to have a belt because they thought I'd hang myself. The sheets are stapled down, they're rubber, so that you can't take the staples out, roll it up, and hang yourself. Despite the fact that this one woman apparently hung herself, though she was not ambulatory, could barely walk or talk or move, and of course they probably just gave her the wrong medicine and fucked up her pills and she died and they covered it up. I don't know. That's another story. Let's backtrack a bit, right? Let's give a little context. So I'm like 24 years old. I'm a heroin junkie. I'm a degenerate. Doing all kinds of stupid shit. And I get a few charges. Now there's these things called like restorative justice, divertive justice programs. These are just euphemisms for saying like, you get like, 6 months in jail for something that's related to that you can explain is related to addictions, like you blame it on your addictions essentially. Like let's say you got in a cocaine rage and went and beat up your ex's boyfriend or something like this, and you were looking at like a year in prison for assault. Well, if you didn't have any priors and you butter up the judge, maybe they'll send you to this place. And it's like a program where you work on your mental health and your addictions, and you come out. It's supposed to be 3 to 9 months. Every 3 months, you go in front of a parole board. But because they need funding and nobody goes here voluntarily, they never let you out. And you can actually repeat this program 2 times. So you could be there in 27 months when you might have only been looking at 6 months in prison. Really, really shitty and horrible situation to occur, right? And of course, they were constantly malpractice, negligence. When I walked into this facility, they made me spread my ass cheeks and cough like I was, a Colombian cocaine mule in airport security. They were really serious. They didn't have doors on the bathrooms because people were doing inhalants and smoking crack. This one woman, she was in a wheelchair and in diapers, and they would make her crawl back and not give her toilet paper or diapers. They crawl back to her room as punishment. They were horrible, horrible people. However, despite all this, they were so afraid of backlash from woke bullshit. And I think part of this was around the time when Jordan Peterson was speaking out against Bill. I think it was C-16? No. I forget the name of the bill, but like the trans speak bill that Jordan Peterson rose to prominence about in Canada. This is in Canada. So they were so afraid of anything that had to do with that could be even remotely contrived as prejudicial against LGBT plus 17 $6 sign people that they didn't want to disrupt that because of the potential backlash. All these institutions were quite afraid at this time, and this one was no different. There's quite a few LGBT plus people in this place because despite the, we don't have to get into whether we think they should have the right to go into bathrooms or play sports or anything like this. Like, I probably agree with most of you that it's gone too far. But let's have a little empathy, like, just for these people that clearly, if you really thought you were in the wrong body, like, clearly you're going through some horrible stuff, regardless of the cause or the definition of whether that's a mental pathology or, your soul is in the wrong body or whatever. Clearly that's a horrible situation to be. So a lot of these people have addiction issues and mental health issues. So there's a lot of them in this facility. And this one guy, he's about 6 feet tall, skinny as a rail, 120 pounds, 130 pounds. His hair was like partially shaved here. There'd be a patch here and then like a spike sticking out here. He had a thing shaved here. So like it broke up like half of his the back of his head, and then he'd have a rat tail. It was all colored differently. He had random piercings all over the place that were just like screws that like came out of his cheek and his forehead and all this stuff. And he had carved like these Blair Witch sign things under his eyes, that like they were like crosses or like the the weird Blair Witch thing and shit. Fucking freak, right? And of course, this guy thought he was a fox, and he had threatened to like sue them and all this stuff. And these guys, this facility, had been dealing with like 50 civil suits and all these class actions because they had all this negligence. And of course, what happens is because the people launching the suits are these junkies with no recourse. They don't have the capacity to really launch a suit. They just pay them, $1,000 out of court, and they say, "Oh, sure, $1,000, yeah, fuck this, whatever, okay," and then it goes away. But this place was very afraid of this guy because of this LGBT stuff, and of course he thought of himself as a fox, and that was quite a few letters down the line, but it was enough. This guy would literally carve himself. Like you go in lines, like waiting for things like methadone and stuff. Like you have like 2 med times or 3 med times, and you go wait in line. And he would actively carve stuff in his arm with knives. What he had done was he must have had like pen knives, like Swiss Army knives, and he had dismantled them and taken off like the razor blades and shoved them up his ass or something to get them in. Those were the ones that the guys didn't know about. But the ones that they did know about were these ones that were like the screws and like the saw and at least one of the actual blades from a penknife that he had pushed through the edge of his shoe because he considered them his talons, right? He considered them his claws. He needed it to feel like he was in his own body, and he had caused some disruption against these people. Saying like, "I'm going to sue you if you don't let me do this." Of course, they wouldn't let me have a pencil, so it's ridiculous. And I know all this because one of the few reasonable people that worked there, there was this doctor you're supposed to see on like a bi-weekly basis that I saw maybe once a month, talked to him about this, and he basically said like, "Yeah, it's batshit insane, but we can't do anything about it because of the social climate right now. But of course, if he threatens you, of course we'll do something." They wouldn't, right? We'll get to that, why they didn't, but they didn't. And it actually ended up worse for me. Just one thing this guy else would do, like he would do a lot of inhalants by going in the bathroom and stuff, and then he'd start going like crazy. He'd start shaking over, like he thought he was the exorcist after snorting hairspray or whatever. And then when you get passes, like, because it's like a minimum security, like they do lock you in, and there's like an intake and like a lock, and then the security guard has to escort you, and then they lock it behind you, and then you're in like an intake, and then you go from like room to room to room, like in a submarine to get in or out. But you get these passes for like an hour to go buy a pack of cigarettes or like go buy some Skittles. But I mean, everyone just buys meth, and because it's fairly close to the downtown east side, the famous downtown east side of Vancouver, which is like one of the most famous ghettos in the world. There's been a lot of documentaries about it, especially during the opioid epidemic. And then people would smuggle shit back in, right? Like me, and my girlfriend was smuggling me in a lot of heroin. That's another story. But he would go trick. Like he'd stand outside the front, and some guy would pick him up and give him $50 to fuck him in the ass or whatever. Probably more like $10, judging by this guy. But then he'd go spend it on meth and come back all speedy, because you could tell, because he'd come back and he'd be like, right, just fucking weirdo. And we were all wary of him because I said, like, we saw him carve in the lines. Like, everyone knew this guy was a freak. We just keep our distance. So, on to the actual incident. I was neutral with him, right? I just didn't talk to the fucking guy. But we walk by each other we pass by in a hall, in one of the wards, and he bumps into my shoulder, and he says something to me like, "You smell like fucking grain stuff, buddy." And I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he meant like I smelled like pot, but I hadn't been smoking pot because it just, number one, any money I had went to heroin to smuggle in to the facility because I didn't want to go on methadone, and I was a junkie, right? And it's a stressful environment. You want to do heroin to pass the time. And And two, like, you get paranoid if you smoke pot and you're in a place with a bunch of weirdos. You know, it's not a good environment. The vibes are not right. So I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then he said something like about amoebas. So he's thinking about like green stuff like growths, like mold or whatever. And I was just like, you smell like fucking green stuff, you fucking guy. And he got a little angry and he like came up to me, clearly not realizing he's like 120 pounds. But then I remembered, oh fuck, this is knife shoe guy, and he's got knives in his shoes. And I look down and you can see there he had like three of them out of maybe three in one shoe and like two in the other, and clearly at least one of them was like an actual knife, quite sharp, as you'll see later when I show you the scars that I have from this. So he starts coming up to me, and just based on where I was in like this concavity, like of the architecture. It was like a supply closet that had been like closed off. So I'm like stuck, kind of like in a locker almost. So I'm like behind and back, and he's in front of me, and there's a hallway this way, and over to this side, right, perpendicular to where I am. There's three guards. Now these guards, they're Indian, they're hired under the table, they don't know how to do their job, and they don't care. I'm starting to indicate to them, like with one hand, I'm kind of holding him off, like at bay, and with the other hand, I'm like indicating, hey, come do your fucking job, guys. Like this guy's trying to attack me, and he's knife shoe guy. He's unhinged, he's crazy, whatever. They just ignore me. They're probably taking bets like, hey, you want 2-1 on the fat guy? No, fat guy looks like a fighter, but that knife shoe guy, you know, I think he can do it, you know, whatever, you know, I'll take that bet, you know, that bullshit in Hindi. And so the guy keeps coming at me, and of course I was really out of shape at this time. Like I couldn't have even walked a block. I was both fat and skinny, but I had martial arts experience. This guy's like 120 pounds. I knew I could kick his ass, but the problem was I had been in the hole recently. The hole being like solitary. They call it seclusion in mental health facilities. And it's just a room that's like padded, and there's shit and piss and also, you know, cum and blood all over the walls, and there's nothing, like no architecture. It's just blank. They might have a bed that's like soaked in every, you know, body fluid imaginable, and there's a little slit that they like seal off with paper. They can't hear you, whatever, and they toss you in there. They had tossed me in there prior because they had given me cranberry juice, which I'm allergic to, and they said I tried to commit suicide. This is another story later that I'll explain. And I almost died in there having anaphylactic shock because they wouldn't give me medical attention. It's a long story, but I didn't want to get sent back there. You know, I'm starting to have like PTSD from this fucking place. So I'm trying to deal with this, and I don't really know how, because he's starting to come up, and now the fucker's kicking me in the shins. And he ends up nicking something and drawing blood, and I'll show you right here. Scars prove this fucking thing. I can't see the webcam because of the OBS studio, the way it works, but I'm sure you can see that there's like some scars down there where there's like a discoloration and there's no hair there. Well, that's because of he nicked it, right? And it looked worse than it was. Like there was quite a lot of blood, like dripping down and getting all over the floor and all this shit. But I mean, it's on the shin. I don't think there's anything super dangerous, like any structure that he could have really fucked up, unless he got to the back of my leg or my upper leg. But you know, he's trying, and it's dangerous. You know, I'm also worried he's gonna kick me in the cock and sever my dick. And what's the point of living if you don't have a dick, right? So, I'm still trying to indicate, pushing him off. I start like teeping him, like push kicking him, right? To keep him at bay, because I'm thinking like, okay, I'm just gonna fucking kick you in the stomach to keep you at bay. But now these guys are looking, and they're like these guards, and they're like interested. They're not gonna help, but they're interested. And I think one of them gets on the radio. There were actual officers stationed in this facility because there's quite a few people there. But I don't know if they're gonna do anything. I don't know if they're gonna come help, or just arrest me or whatever, throw me back in the hole. But after a few times, after he's kicked me a few times, I'm severely bleeding. I realize they're not going to do anything. The strategy that I come up with is, okay, first I got to get out of this fucking divot, this hole, this concavity. So when he comes at me again, because he's coming at me kind of like falling into me and going, and then like just doing kicks like this, like, you know, just like he's throwing a fit. So comes at me, and I just like uh, check hook him like a slap, basically, just stun him. I reorient myself, and then push kick him back a bit just so I have some space. And now he's angry because he gets pushed back and he hits his arm on something like I think it was a water fountain, and he like holds it. He's oh fuck, like he trips a bit, freaks out, and then he runs at me, and like I can tell like he's probably gonna like try to kick me in like the fucking head or the stomach or something. Like it's bad now, so I don't have any other option. So I lift up my leg, I Sparta kick that motherfucker as hard as I fucking can, and he gets pushed into these guys and bowls them over, all the guards, right? And that was kind of what I was thinking. Like, yeah, I got to involve them, so I got to push him into their area, so they have to deal with him. But actually, he just knocked them all over. And unfortunately for me, when he fell over, he nicked one of them. And some artery like under their armpit or some shit. It was very confusing how they explained it to me. But like his knife shoes slid up and nicked something. And of course this is my fault, not their fault for allowing some guy to have fucking knives in his shoes in a mental health facility in a jail for fucking retards. I think they're the retards. So they threw me back in the hole and they were threatening charges and shit like this. But of course, what ended up happening was my mother is a high-profile lawyer that worked around downtown East Side doing advocacy work, nonprofit work. She has a different last name than me, so they didn't know that she was related to me. But I'm starting to tell them, like, I'm going to get you guys. Like, I'm going to launch a suit, and I'm not a dodo like all these other junkies. So you're not going to get away with this. You're not just going to pay me off and give me $2,000 under the table for me to not do anything. Like, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna fuck you guys over for life, and I'm gonna take you for all you're worth. And they knew, because I'm a very well spoken person, even on heroin, that like I've got the resources to do this. And now they know my mother is this high profile lawyer, so they were terrified of me. So that's why they would throw me in the hole and try to like break my spirit and all this, and try to keep me there for longer. Like I was gonna be there for like 27 months, like stuck there. And they were never going to let me out. Like I never was allowed to get like these passes, so my girlfriend had to come and smuggle drugs in for me, heroin, so that I didn't go into withdrawals and things like this. But because of how this worked, like I knew I had to get out of there, but I'm not sure how. Like after I'm in the hole for like 48 hours after this happened, I don't really know what to do. But I end up negotiating with that one kind of sensible person, and I explain what happened, and he finds a way to give me a pass for like an hour, so that I can call. I can't remember what I said. Like if I'm trying to call a lawyer, like I invoked my legal rights. Like I called my mom and I was like, what the fuck do I do here? Like I invoked some kind of legal procedure, like where they have to let me out once every X months or whatever if like I'm not, whatever the fuck it was. And I just fuck off, right? I go AWOL. And what I do is I'm glad that I go AWOL, because I'm like, oh, now they have to deal with it in the courts. Or the cops are going to come, and I'll deal with people that are sensible. Like I wanted the cops to come at this point, because like I wanted to be arrested because it was so bad. But what ended up happening was I threatened them. My mom starts threatening them because she knows what's going on, and there's tons of horrible things that happened here, not just this, right? So what ends up happening is the guys that work there, they write me as AWOL, but my dad is allowed to go get my stuff while we're dealing with this, because I had a lot of stuff that's there, like all my clothes are there, all my belongings, because I was supposed to be there for like up to 9 months, or really 27 months. And I had this journal that I had been documenting all the infractions that they made, and I didn't want them to know about this because I had smuggled in a pencil. Remember, I wasn't allowed a pen or a pencil. So I'd say something like, okay, camera 2, 12:26 p.m. July 7th, like whatever, like nurse abuses patient by not allowing them to have a diaper, or whatever, like, or nurse makes guy scrub floor with toothbrush, things like that, because they were really doing these types of things. So I needed that notebook, and I was able to retrieve it. So I got my dad to go, and I waited in the car because I'm not stepping foot in there. So he goes, he gets the stuff with the security guard, and then he comes back, and I'm missing one of my bags, and I didn't know if it was the bag that contained the journal. Thank God it wasn't, right, for what happens next. So I told him to go back and try to get the last one. And when he goes back in the facility, you know what the fucking security guard says? I'm sorry, we don't have any record of anyone named Zach, and then my last name, ever being at this facility. And my father, he's a scientist, he's a very respectable, intelligent man. He's saying, like, no, I'm the guy who just came in here. Like, he thought it must have been a mistake, but or the guy just didn't recognize him. I don't know how he wouldn't, but and he's like, no, he just broken record. No record, no record. And my dad realizes what's going on and says, "You fucking corrupt motherfuckers, we're gonna take you down." Now I got my dad on my side too, right? Because he kind of didn't believe that it was as bad as I was saying. But luckily, this notebook that I still have, I've never launched this suit properly. I still have it. So it was like a Jason Bourne film. Like, they erased my existence from being at this facility because they knew of what they had done, and how bad it was, and how dangerous it could be for them. Because, of course, my safety was in jeopardy. They almost killed me with poisoning me with something I was allergic with, and then not treating me. Of course, all the abuse that they were doing, and then this, like, I got cut. I have the scars to prove it. Of course, it was on camera, and then they blame me for the fact that this knife sliced some other guy's, like, armpit or whatever, like a security guard. They probably paid him off under the table too. So all of this, because they were so, I mean, a lot of this is just they were negligent and corrupt anyways, but the fact that this guy was allowed to have knives in his shoes, this is all because of fear of the LGBT backlash. And as far as I know, this guy, he didn't get in trouble at all. It was considered my fault, this entire fight, just by the way. So yeah, Chris D'Elia has this bit where he's like, "Stop pushing me to the right," like, because he's like, "I'm a fucking centrist." That's how I fucking feel these days. Fucking woke, fucking idiots. And that's it. Yeah, I'll tell you other stories about this facility later, but that's that one.